Hello everyone and welcome to today's Mondac webinar in association with Volpe Koenig. Experts from the US, Canada and Europe will delve into the evolving landscape of FinTech patents and provide a comprehensive update on AI's growing role in FinTech and patent law. My name is Dan Sampaio and I'm joined by a brilliant panel to take us through today's discussion. Gerald Holt is a shareholder with Volpe Koenig. Jay collaborates with clients at all stages of development, from startup entrepreneurs to teams of engineers at Fortune 500 companies. Jay helps clients secure, manage, and protect their IP, devising and implementing results-orientated strategies in order to provide peace of mind that those assets are secure. Clients appreciate Jay's holistic and inventive approach to optimizing the value of their intellectual property portfolios. Jay is on the Engineering Entrepreneurship Advisory Board at Villanova University. He is a frequent speaker and blogger regarding intellectual property, and in particular artificial intelligence, medical devices, and blockchain applications, and is the author of 4 intellectual property books. Natalie Raffel is the co-founder and managing partner of Brion Raffel LLP, a Canadian law firm specializing in the intellectual property law. She is a world-renowned expert in the patenting of software, business methods, artificial intelligence and machine learning, and the legal issues surrounding such subject matter. Since 2020, Natalie has been recognized as a global leader in the IAM Strategy 300, the world's leading IP strategists. Since 2019, she has served as an intellectual property advisor expert on several international panels for the World Intellectual Property Office and other high-profile organizations to assess IP strategies in multiple countries around the world. Bernd Lacroix established businesses in the fields of high-frequency trading, as well as chart trading of financial instruments, where he became acquainted with intellectual property. Bernd was then trained to become a German and European patent attorney and has been a partner of Wüsthof and Wüsthof since 2018. Bernd has expertise in all aspects of European patent practice and focuses on prosecuting patents as well as on handling opposition, appeal and litigation cases. Due to his computer science background, Bernd has extensive experience in the field of software-related inventions. Before we begin today's webinar, some housekeeping items. For attorneys in the state of Pennsylvania in the US, this course has been approved for 1 substantive CLE credit by the Pennsylvania CLE Board. Volpe Koenig will report your attendance to the Pennsylvania CLE online portal. If you are in a US jurisdiction outside of Pennsylvania, you can request that a certificate of completion be issued to you by email for you to submit to your own CLE board. Send your request to vkwebinars@vklaw.com. This email address will be shared in the chat for you to note. Please stay on the webinar until the end of the program so your attendance can be verified electronically. And if you haven't already downloaded the course materials, you can find the PDF of today's presentations in the handout pane. You will also see an evaluation form. We ask that you download and return the evaluation form after the program. Finally, you are able to submit questions to our panel today by typing them into the questions pane of the toolbar on the right-hand side of your page. And we do encourage you to get those questions in. We'll endeavour to answer as many as possible. It's now my pleasure to hand you over to our panel to begin today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great to be here. So it's always nice to just start with looking at a bit of some statistics, kind of understanding where we are with patenting in this area. So next slide, please. So just to situate us in terms of patenting software, because when we're talking about FinTech, we're really talking about software. About 70% of the 3.4 million global annual patent filings are software based. So this is important to understand that finance and banking certainly is an area, AI, blockchain, cybersecurity, I mean, you name it. Everyone is focused, life science companies, everyone's focused on now looking at their software innovation, making sure that's protected, and the bulk of the patent filings today are in that area. And companies now realizing that they're going to have to be much more sophisticated in terms of filing and prosecuting these patents. There's a lot of case law now that can somewhat be confusing, can create some challenges, and a lot of the action is around what subject matter here is patentable, and the issues vary by jurisdiction. Of course, I'm a Canadian practitioner, and we have both the US and European practitioner on the line. So all 3 regions are going to be different. Next slide. So this just gives you a sense of, if we look at U.S. patent grants, and of course, from the U.S. patent, when you're looking at your portfolio, is going to be a very important asset within a global portfolio. The big players, I mean, Samsung last year, large number of grants, LG, IBM, but you also have, Alphabet, Google's parent company, and Apple, and many companies that you recognize as really strong software players in that list as well, Microsoft. Next slide. And so if we get deeper into, let's look at AI and ML, which is going to be very important, obviously, in financial technology solutions. China has really emerged as a major contributor to patent filings in this area. And in fact, some of the data that I have is from a recent report from IP Ontario, which is a newly created institution in Canada that's doing reports in various areas. And they issued a report on AI going deep in terms of global filings and assessing it. And obviously, you see a very outsized gain by Chinese, a lot of institutions as well as companies that are seeking patents in this area. Next slide. So if you look at the top 10 players, they really only cover 12% of the total AI patent filings. So this is interesting. And what this is telling us is that there's lots of room for other players to be getting in and making sure that, what your core competency is in terms of these areas, that you can still protect area. And that's what's happening in terms of the filings. Everyone is getting into this game and making sure that they're protecting their innovation in this area. And so just to give you a sense, so 63% of the issued U.S. patents that we just looked at each year since 2005 have been software related, and almost 50% in Europe issued patents each year are for software related inventions. So you're getting a theme here. Software is definitely patentable, and the question is, what are we going to patent? What are we going to protect within the innovation within our company? Next slide. So this is an interesting graph. This just came out of IP Ontario's report, and it shows you, particularly in AI, in what sectors are people filing and for what. So you notice that massive spike right at the top. I mean, that's in life science, and that's in the area of neural networks. But as you go down, you can kind of drill in and see what are the different areas. So we've got neural networks and then functional applications of AI and some subcategories of machine learning. You see I highlighted in green for money, banking and finance, and e-commerce. So we're seeing a lot. And again, that is for neural networks and functional applications as the leading areas where you see patent filings. And then, of course, network security and other areas is that which security is going to obviously be very important for FinTech, blockchain. And so if you look along that graph, you're going to see quite a few areas, and all of that relates back to FinTech. Next slide. So in terms of AI inventions, I mean, we can focus on other areas as well, but if we look at the types of patent applications, you're seeing sort of three buckets of patent applications covering different areas of AI. So this the fundamentals of AI, so that core AI technology, so improvements in neural networks, for example. And then you have a second grouping, which is really more the applications. So things where you're enhancing the AI system, so image processing, labeling imagery, that sort of thing. And then you have this third bucket, which is more these AI supportive technologies. We know that AI needs a tremendous amount of data. We need computing power. And so these areas are obviously becoming critical in this space as well. So these are kind of the three big buckets. And I'll hand it over now to Bern to give us a little bit of background in this area.
Well, thanks, Natalie. Now that we've heard about more or less the trends on AI patenting, we will also have a brief section on background. So next slide, please. So the main point to make here is actually we want to, basically make the basis for the subsequent discussion on what is actually patentable. The important thing is AI, I mean, as it's stated here, is, as we all know, the simulation of human intelligence processes by machines. But the main point is it's mathematical models. Mathematical models executed on computer programs on a computer. And this is to be kept in mind. So essentially what is normally done, an AI model is trained. So something is learned. I've just listed a few types of learning here. There's not only these three ones, there's obviously more than those. Also want to only to focus on supervised learning as a brief example. Supervised learning is something where you train a system like a neural network using input and output data, and actually do this training to learn a mapping function that can then accurately predict the output when new input is given. So this is just a brief example. If you go to the next slide, the rest is, I think, not so important here. That the main point, as I said, is this is about mathematical models. Here, just as one example, very simple neural network is shown. Of course, there's other models like support vector machines, other classifiers, and neural networks are, quite widespread. And how do they work? Just in very brief, we on the left-hand side, we see such a structure of a network. It basically is thought to resemble the human brain because we have nodes. They are representative of the neurons of the human brain. We have vertices between the nodes, which are representative of the synapses between the neurons of the human brain. And basically, this resembles, again, the human brain. And again, such a structure, a mathematical structure, is then trained and to learn such a mapping function as I've just said. And it typically works by inputting some input data to the input nodes on the input layer. And then basically what is calculated is shown on the right-hand side in one such node. Like if you have a look at the left-hand side and a hidden node, for instance, you see that there's incoming vertices. So there's input incoming to each node. Those inputs are weighted, as we see on the right-hand side. Then there's a summation performed, and this sum then goes into a so-called activation function, which is typically a simple threshold, maybe of course other functions. And then if the sum, so to speak, of the weighted inputs is above the threshold, such a neuron will fire and output or provide its output to the next node over the subsequent vertices. And while this is a quite easy process actually, and so to speak, if input is input on the input layer, this goes through to the output layer, and on the output then we have the output of the mapping function. So, and this is basically, in very brief, how a neural network works. Again, the takeaway is that this is a mathematical model, and we have to keep this in mind because it's important for patentability aspects, which we will discuss now. And for that, I hand over to Jay, who will begin with first examples.
Thanks, Bernd. So the question that we get a lot as patent attorneys, or really it's more of a statement, is, oh, I thought software wasn't patentable. As Natalie pointed out, that a huge majority of patents that are being granted are either largely or in some part software. Next slide, please. So generally, in order to get a patent before any patent office around the world, there are three general requirements. It's novelty, non-obviousness, and utility or practicality. Novelty is, is something new? Is this different than what has gone before? So that's pretty straightforward. Non-obviousness is a little bit is a little bit of a gray area where it's like you can have something that's similar to what has gone before but not be exact. Is that patentable? What will happen is the patent examiner will look at that and say, well, even though it's not exactly the same as what has gone before, it's an obvious variant. Like anybody would have seen, starting with the other patent, anybody would have seen that they could come up with this, like a trivial improvement. So in order for something to be patentable, it has to be not obvious over what we call the prior patents. And the third thing is the invention has to have utility. It has to be useful. In the US, up until about 10 years ago, that was a really pretty easy standard or hurdle to overcome. The U.S. Supreme Court came out with a a decision, Alice Court via CLS Bank, about 10 years ago, and it said, essentially that software in a vacuum with no real world application is abstract and does not have utility. So this was at that time a sweeping change to the patent laws, and I think that gave rise to the notion of software is not patentable. So it is patentable. It's just that we have to handle it in a certain way. We have to describe it in a certain way and claim it in a certain way such that it is patentable. And it helps to have that application tied to a specific real world technological problem. So what we wanted to do here is to go through 7 different examples of how AI and neural networks in FinTech have been patentable in the US, just as an illustration. And then Bernd will go into how Europe is different, because each, even though all of the patent offices have these novelty, non-obviousness, and utility standards, how they implement them can be quite different. So next slide, please. So this first example is an example of a patent which controls spending on a user's account based on their spending habits. And what it essentially does is the system authorizes a user spending on their account by comparing their transactions to a baseline spending profile. And then they have what they call a dysfunctional spending profile. And it's designed particularly for users who may experience like either a temporary or progressive mental instability. So what happens is the system first, analyzes all of the data of a particular person, and then creates a baseline, and that includes financial transactions and frequency, and then it comes up with a mental state, and the mental state can be either normal, a ramp up to a dysfunctionality, or a ramp down. So when a transaction is within the normal profile, then it's allowed. If it's not within the normal profile, then it's either additional approvals required or a third party is contacted. So, and the benefits of these neural networks or machine learning or AI type models is they continually improve. They continually look at the user's transactions and update the model as time goes on. Next slide, please. Okay, this next patent is directed to a system and method for enhancing modeling for credit score risk. So this patent uses credit data along with what they call unconventional credit data with an expanded model to identify new credit risk and enhance the modeling. The interesting thing about this is that it's tailored to each user and also updated in real time. So the machine learning model analyzes what they call unconventional factors, such as non-traditional financial platforms, which could be like Venmo or Zelle, digital payment platforms and account management, and it assesses the risks, and it continually updates the data based upon those new inputs. And this system is designed particularly for people with limited credit history. I know in the US, when people don't have a credit history, it's very difficult for them to get credit. It's like, a catch-22. I can't get credit. I can't establish a credit history if I can't get credit. So this is a model that takes other factors into account to help those people establish their own credit. Next slide, please. So this is a secure messaging system which uses both machine learning and a blockchain network. So what this system does, it allows communication between accredited nodes, which are part of the blockchain network, and not accredited nodes, and it cross authenticates these non-authenticated nodes. And then it uses the blockchain to maintain the integrity of the entire line of communications. So this technology is applicable to scenarios like supply chain management in high security or high value shipments like drugs, food chain security, and other sensitive goods. So again, it ensures real-time monitoring and validation of the shipments or the particular events. And what happens is, like during that time, the anomalies within the blockchain are detected, such as like damage or delayed shipments or incomplete or mistaken paperwork, to determine if that particular, so like whatever the product is, like drug or food, whether that should be pulled from the chain of custody. Next slide, please. So this is a system that uses cash flow forecasting, and it uses machine learning to improve the management of cash and liquidity. It looks at, or it optimizes the interest earnings of the organization and minimizes the expenses. So what this does is it uses a number of different financial models, and that's the benefit of these types of things. You can use all different types of financial models and learn from those financial models, and then feed back into the model to make sure that you're getting the best data possible. And it's really tailored towards a particular organization. So this one in particular, it minimizes interest paid or borrowing, maximizes interest that can be obtained, and maximizes cash on hand, or if there's too much cash on hand, that it would go out and invest it. Next slide, please. This is an interesting one. It's essentially an AI financial advisor. And what it does is it uses neural networks to provide personalized, context-specific financial advice to each individual. So it takes basic financial information, and then in addition, it uses the information on a particular user and the user's specific questions to input into the model to generate certain views or certain outputs back to the user. This system in particular is also able to place a financial transaction. So if you want to buy a stock or a bond or move into positions, it can do that. And all of the financial advice is recorded on a blockchain, ensuring that all of the records are secure and traceable. And it essentially creates a portable financial record of all of the AI generated advice. Next slide, please. This system is interesting. It utilizes machine learning and creates trusted transaction cards, and with also secure locations to generate geographical map of trusted transaction cards. So what it does is it uses machine learning and secure communications to identify what they call these trusted transaction cards and map their location. And how it does that, it looks at the user's transactions, including location data, because I guess some locations are a little bit more risky than others. Like we all know that difficult side of town is. So it takes all this information in and creates a trust score. And if the user has a certain trust score above a certain threshold, it allows the user to certain other services, a higher level of services. So, for example, in the event of an emergency, the user may be directed to a more secure location where other trusted people with trusted cards are. It allows greater access to security funds. It could call emergency services or even send an autonomous vehicle to provide secure transportation when those autonomous vehicles eventually come to being. So this was interesting in that it uses not only financial data, but also geolocation data. Next slide, please. So this one is interesting. This is not a FinTech patent, but this is, as Natalie indicated, this is a AI patent that is directed to the improvement of an actual neural network. I won't go into a lot of detail here because it's really very heady, but in order to improve a training process, and we all know that the training processes of all of these neural networks is extremely important. So this is directed to improving the training process, and this patent implements a method where multiple candidate models are trained sequentially, and they share both neurons and weightings, and the best model of all the models is selected for use, and that's fed back into all the models. So I brought this patent up as an example of although engineers and scientists would say, oh yeah, this is a real world problem to improve a neural network, this is one that, if in looking over the patent application, it would be difficult to say this is directed to a real world problem. But with that said, this patent was issued only 6 months ago. So I do note that there is a question about, have the example patents been litigated? These, I have not checked to see if these particular patents were litigated. A lot of these are newer patents. Some of them are a little older, but I tried to select the newest ones and the latest ones that might not have been litigated. But it is correct, and that's sort of it's part of the system, but a lot of patents are allowed at the patent office, and once they're litigated, they run into a problem with 101 issues. Now, patents that were filed before the Alice case back in 2014 are more likely to run into that problem because they were drafted in a time before the Supreme Court laid down kind of these new guidelines in drafting patent applications. But these newer ones that are they are vetted pretty harshly by the USPTO because they know that this is an area where there is a lot of litigation. So to answer the question, no, we have not, but I have not checked to see whether these were litigated. But due to their since they are more recent patents, they are more likely to stand up to the recent changes in the law, but unfortunately, you never know with litigation. So I will turn this back over to Bernd, who is going to talk about European corollary to what I just spoke about.
Okay, thanks, Jay. Yes, I know we're going to have a more closer look to how things are handled in Europe. You will see that Europe is more limiting. So if you go to the next slide, I first of all thought it's a good idea to just briefly reference the legal basis, because referring back to my slide on the neural network structure I mentioned before, where I said, well, AI models are in fact mathematical models, you'll see a few decisive things here in the legal basis. So first of all, this is Article 52 EPC. What are patentable inventions? So the red marked terms are the important ones. First of all, Europe always requires that the invention is in the field of technology. Then a second paragraph defines explicit exclusions from patentability, and among them are mathematical methods, also programs for computers. That's basically AI. Further than that, methods of doing business, which is relevant for FinTech because FinTech essentially is methods of doing business, and also presentation of information, for example. But the good thing is, third paragraph clarifies, these exclusions only apply for these items as such. In the end, there's of course ways to obtain patents on these aspects, and that's what we're gonna have a look at in the next slides. So next slide, please. Right, so this is the so-called COMVIC approach. COMVIC is the most important decision. It lays down the basic principle of how any software-related inventions are assessed in Europe. In practice, actually what is done is quite formalistically, a claim, like a claim 1 of a patent application, is just formalistically split into two portions. One portion representing only the technical features and the other one representing only the non-technical features of the claim. And then to assess inventiveness, I mean, actually it's quite simple. Only those features which contribute to producing a technical effect, so the technical features are considered for assessing inventiveness, and the others are simply ignored. So a very easy but also fundamental approach, and especially regarding FinTech, for instance, or methods of doing business, it may actually boil down to the extreme case that, I mean, if claim 1 only phrases, so to speak, a high-level abstract idea of a method of doing business, and the only technical elements in the claim are a computer, for instance, or a network, then only the computer and the network remain, if it's split up in two portions, as I've just explained, then only the computer and the network would remain as the only technical elements, and the rest is just ignored. And then, of course, you'll see that a computer and a network is notoriously known and therefore not patentable. So this is the extreme case, but that's straightforward COMVIC. Next slide, please. And as I said, it's decisive what features contribute to produce a technical effect. And here, the decisive point is what actually qualifies as a technical effect. Just to give one example, I mean, probably to say first, what we are interested in is the further technical effects that are associated with the technical implementation. Those will count, others will not count. And just to give an example, there's a quite prominent example of, an auction scheme. So there was an invention of where the invention lied basically in new rules for an auction scheme, so that the auction basically more quickly converged to the end result. So that was the idea. And of course, there's an inherent technical effect. I mean, if the auction converges more quickly, obviously also less computational resources will be required. So there is, in fact, obviously a technical effect, but the point is, such a technical effect will not be acknowledged by the EPO as a technical effect. What the EPO only considers is really down to the further implementation are there so-called further technical effects. And basically that boils down, we will see this in the latest slide, in the subsequent slides, to what actually a skilled person, like a skilled programmer, would do when he really implements such an idea on a computing system. So next slide, please. Right, so this was the legal basis, as it's also stated in the EPO guidelines and in the case law. I mean, that was quite abstract, so I thought it's good, and that's what I've prepared here, just a few slides. What actually does it mean for practice? What can actually be patented in practice? First thing, if we here refer to the fundamental AI techniques, Natalie called them also the core AI techniques. As said, I mean, as such, they are excluded from patentability as mere mathematical methods. But they can be patentable, and in order to be patentable, there's two approaches. Either they may be embedded in a technical application, it's the first bullet here, or we include some technical implementation details, and that's something we're going to have also going to look at in more detail at the next slides. But so first of all, next slide, I have two further items. Yes, a second item is AI hardware. Of course, I would say that's quite obvious. Hardware is inherently technical. So any inventions about hardware, such as like, I don't know, certain farms of graphic processors or dedicated AI chips, that's for sure always patentable because it's technical. And third item, I also mentioned graphical user interfaces here because you may remember on one of the previous slides, I said also that presentation of information as such is excluded from patentability, but also here there's way to obtain patents. So next slide, please. So we're going to have a look at this in the subsequent slides. Here, I refer to what I just said, the approach of embedded in a technical application. So any software that is embedded in a technical application, and I just make a brief, I think also quite illustrative example. Just imagine a robot arm, a robot arm that is controlled by software. So the robot arm, when the arm moves, of course, something physically is happening, and that is, of course, inherently technical. So in that case, the software, because it controls the robot arm, is embedded in a technical application. And these types of inventions, where the invention then probably lies in the software itself, which may be AI-based software, this will be patentable. I have included further examples here like image processing, also predictive maintenance, self-driving cars, and things like that. All of those are obviously technical. Now today we are also, of course, talking about FinTech. And this is where I think the first major limitation comes in. FinTech applications, most of them will relate to business methods of doing business. And as I said, this is excluded from patentability, will typically not count as technical applications. And that's why this one approach, like embedding in a technical application, will, for many, at least many FinTech applications, not work. But the other approach will work. And if you go to the next slide, this other approach, as I said, is we need to include technical implementation details. As I mentioned previously, this boils down to having a look at what actually the skilled programmer, the computer scientist, would do when implementing these higher level business related ideas on a computing system, and what technical considerations would the skilled person make. And typically, I mean, this may relate to both software and hardware aspects. So anything that the programmer will think of, and typically practice shows that, of course, in all of those systems, like if you have, say, this going back to Jay's example, for instance, the example of cash flow forecasting. I mean, also such a system need to be built on a computing system, and the question is how this is done. And typically, experience shows that in the way how this is implemented, normally also something lies where, well, patents can be granted. So next slide, please. I have on the next slide, I've just to make this a bit more illustrative, I've provided a few examples just that you get an idea of what aspects could be focused on. For instance, say you have like a system hosted in a data center and you use virtualization. And the way you use virtualization is, well, has some well, specific characteristics that may already suffice. For instance, if you talk about data transmission, so like faster or more reliable, more efficient communication, transmission of data might be something. Also, security is a big deal. So Jay also mentioned one example. And this would also be perfectly patentable in Europe, secure messaging using a blockchain. This would be perfect here because, I mean, anything that is related to data security is acknowledged to be technical. So like using encryption or digital signatures, for instance, in some particular form or some particular way will already be sufficient for patentability. Another example, optimizing load distribution, also just to improve resource allocation in a computing system, quicker access to data, like for instance using certain implementation, using indexes in databases, whatever. So this boils down, as you can see from this discussion, of course, to what the skilled programmer, as I said, the computer scientist would do, but this is where actually patents can be obtained in Europe, as we talk about even business methods. So in the fintech area, for instance, this will work. And bearing in mind all that, you will see that some of Jay's examples, which all worked in the US, some of them, like cash flow forecasting, if there are no technical implementation details, this would not work in Europe. Other examples would, like this example of secure messaging using a blockchain. So next slide, please. Here, as I said, I also referred to graphical user interfaces, also interesting point. Also, presentation information can be technical. The points to be considered here is either what is presented or also how something is presented. And in both of these aspects, what and how, some technical solution may be seen, and the answer, or the question to be answered here is always if such a method credibly assists the user in performing a technical task by means of a continued or guided human-machine interaction process. And I think I have a quite nice example here that's also out of FinTech. It was about trading financial instruments directly from a chart. Just think of, typically if you want to make a trade on for instance, you want to buy a stock, you need to enter the price from at which you want to buy, for instance. And this invention was about doing it directly from the chart, so you didn't need to type in the price by several keyboard strokes, but you simply used the mouse and the mouse pointer. The level of the mouse pointer basically in the chart defines the price. So a different way of inputting data, which is less error prone, quicker, also was sufficient to get a patent here because it assisted the user in performing a technical task, inputting data. So next slide, please. Yeah, so this was basically it to wrap up this discussion in Europe. I have another brief example here. Software inventions. For any software inventions, AI, but also other software inventions, it's critical, as also Jay said, to draft applications in the proper way, and then in the end, they typically work. And there's different drafting recommendations, of course, but I think the most decisive thing is focus on or limit the description and the claims to the technical aspects. Here, this example was about e-commerce. Very in brief, you see an ad on the TV, then a QR code is shown. You scan the QR code using your mobile phone, and then the mobile phone automatically opens the shopping app, and you place the order. So this is really pure e-commerce. Normally, you would think this is not patentable, but as we see in the next slide, so next slide, please. This patent was granted with a decent, quite decent scope of protection. And the trick is essentially, as I said, focus on the technical features, so that questions on the technicality do not even arise. And this is how I've drafted claim 1. It's quite straightforward. I've just focused on this QR code saying we transfer a data set from a TV to a mobile terminal, comprising steps of encoding data into the QR code, displaying the QR code on the TV, scanning it on the mobile terminal, and then decoding the data set. This is entirely technical. And of course, we needed to add a few features for that to be granted, but we really got a decent scope of protection because the features we added were quite straightforward, but they were not shown in the prior art, and therefore the patent was granted. So bottom line of what I'm saying here is these software applications need to be drafted properly. And even, as I just said, we have some limitations. Just really, also, as you've seen from Natalie's statistics, it's definitely doable in Europe in a wide range to also obtain AI software patents, also in business areas like FinTech. Which brings me to an end, and I pass on to Natalie again.
Perfect. Thanks, Bern. So just to kind of wrap up, because I know, and I think Jay and Bern probably get the same questions. Well, can I maintain these things as trade secrets? We talk about things sitting in a black box. Who's going to access them? And so let's talk a little bit about that, that strategy that I think companies continue to grapple with, what to patent, what to maintain as a trade secret, and what to just publicly disclose so that others can't patent that. So next slide, please. I think we need to understand, in terms of the statistics I showed earlier, there are a lot of filings in this area, including in FinTech, and it's growing exponentially. So we're talking about really, I think, an arms race. People are collecting patent assets in this space, and patents are rarely asserted immediately. In fact, often I've seen many statistics about that. True patent value really peaks at about 13 to 15 years post-filing in terms of the patent value, maybe even later. And so assertions on average don't begin until 8 to 10 years after filing. And so we saw a lot of these filings really pick up, 2017, 2018. So, you do the math. And now we're seeing that, many high-tech industries now are following suit. And we're now seeing also consolidation, some standardization discussions around that. So I think we are going to potentially see now more litigation. And there are techniques, everyone says, well, how are you going to know what a competitor is actually doing? I mean, we are seeing certain reverse engineering techniques. I mean, if AI can develop, we can use AI to have functional applications. We can use AI to figure out what folks are doing and reverse that way. So there are going to be techniques that get developed. And just next slide quickly. There's been economists have looked at this, and they've said also that, in economic downturns, and I do believe, we are in a global economic downturn at the moment. I mean, things look like they're going to be moving on the upswing. You do see an uptick in patent litigation and litigation generally between commercial actors in these types of economic situations. When we're in growth, like we were through the pandemic, it was filings, and now we're looking at our assets and looking to see how we can monetize. Next slide, please. And we're seeing some litigation. I mean, this one was taken back from December 2022. There are other examples of this, but everyone's familiar with Apple. So AliveCor came after Apple. They had a suite of AI algorithms to monitor heart rate and ECG data. And so Apple Watches were found to violate AliveCor patents. I'm not sure exactly where this came about in the ITC, but obviously there are skirmishes already happening. This stat goes back to 2020. I don't think the numbers have changed too much. A lot of the action in patent litigation continues to be in the US, followed by Germany and the UK. So when you're looking at your portfolio, of course, the European patent, the US patent are going to be critically important for a lot of companies, because that's where the action is going to happen in terms of litigation. It continues to be in that area. Next slide, please. And so now shifting gears in terms of talking about, well, trade secrets, what are they? And this is a Canadian definition, but I think if you look across the globe, they're very similar definitions. So it's something that is any information that's used in trade or business. It's not generally known in that trade or business. And the key is that it has economic value because it's not known, so it has economic value to the company. And really critically, and this is where the action goes in terms of litigation oftentimes, is it's subject of efforts that are reasonable under the circumstances to prevent it from becoming generally known. And it's that reasonable measures that keeps folks up at night in terms of what are reasonable measures, what's reasonable measures in terms of the industry standard. So next slide, please. And trade secrets aren't registered, and in order to maintain them, they can't be disclosed. So they need to be carefully guarded within your company. Different jurisdictions regulate them differently, right? There's no registration system for these, unlike the multinational systems that we have for patents. So it's really up to each individual enterprise to carefully guard it's trade secrets. But if you want to go after actions, there are penalties available. They may be civil, they can be criminal, depending on the jurisdiction that you're in. And so next slide. So this is the challenge though with trade secrets is it's hard to prove trade secret theft, and you don't actually know you have a trade secret until a judge or a jury decides that you have a valid trade secret that is enforceable. And so what has been done to maintain secrecy? This is what you need to be asking yourselves internally. And what are those reasonable steps? I often say to companies, look at industry standards. How are your competitors? What are their standard practices in terms of maintaining reasonable measures? Often, your outside attorneys, they may be looking at employee handbooks or, the HR experts or employment agreements in terms of how they make sure that there's conduct that is commensurate with taking reasonable measures to protect confidential information. IT companies, you're out, benchmarking yourself to asking your IT service providers whether, what are those reasonable measures you can be taking. So you do need to take significant steps to make sure that only those that really need to have access to that trade secret have access. Next slide. And so, unlike patents, trade secret theft, when you're looking to enforcement, it really does involve a human dimension. Did the individuals in this particular situation, or were there controls in place initiated by individuals that ensured that the trade secret was guarded? And employees are the typical cause of trade secret leakage. It's very, it's not often that you have just a third party unrelated to the company coming in and initiating a trade secret theft. Of course, that can happen, but often it's an inside job. And the other thing to keep in mind is that employee turnover, the average employee turnover is every 4 years. So, you've got, engineers in your company, leading engineers, your leading inventors, within 4 years are often going to work for your competitors. So this creates very, messy situations in the commercial context. So if you're talking about something critically important for your company, you need to be aware that the individuals probably working on that particular trade secret or guarding that trade secret are not going to be there within 4 years. And one of the things I often ask, I work with a lot of, Canadian smaller tech companies, and I ask them right away, when you guys whiteboard, do you wipe down that whiteboard before you leave, or does the cleaning staff, come and do that? That's an easy one. It's just what is your process around making sure that that kind of information is well protected? Or does everyone have access to that shared drive? Or do you have tight controls on who has access to that shared drive? I find smaller, mid-sized companies are a lot messier when it comes to that than larger companies, but you find those same issues of inadvertent disclosures and folks that should have access to the information having access to that confidential or trade secret information. So at the end of the day, trade secrets, yes, they are free to obtain and to some extent, but you do need to put measures in place, and those do have costs. And patent lawsuits are less personal than trade secret litigation. So something to think about as you're weighing, what those assets are within the business and whether you want to maintain it as a trade secret or think about getting some patent protection on that. Can you move to the next slide, please? And then this is an important point. Once the genie's out of the bottle, you can't make it secret again. So that means also that the decision to patent or not to patent has been made for you. So in the US and in Canada, we have a grace period. If you do have public disclosure of your innovation or your invention specifically, you can seek a patent application for it within 1 year of the disclosure. But in Europe, in China, in other important jurisdictions, there is no grace period. So once the genie's out of the bottle, you now can no longer put that back in and can't seek patent protection in important jurisdictions, as we saw, such as Europe. Moving to the next slide. So just in terms of trade secret risks in the digital space, so digital files are easier to access and copy. So when we're talking about FinTech, this is all these days digitized. So this type of information is a lot easier to misappropriate than when we were talking about physical storage. Some would argue maybe not, but we're seeing the number of breaches we're seeing in terms of data security breaches is on the rise exponentially. It's hard to look at a company that hasn't faced some kind of data security breach at this point. And then you've got to add to that the remote work environment. I mean, your biggest issue though, again, is that human dimension. I mean, I'm sitting here. What's preventing me from, taking images with my mobile device of important company information while I'm sitting at my cottage? So these are the kinds of things that, these things will come up in litigation. And what sort of protections do you have around your trade secrets, and what reasonable measures are you taking given the importance of that trade secret to your company? Next slide. And so this is the question du jour in terms of like balancing trade secret protection within the company and patents. Trade secrets are valuable, but the reality is that the strongest companies really do both. I heard TSMC recently talk about they have a catalog of about 150,000 trade secrets within the company. Of course, Taiwan Semiconductor, they also have a lot of patents. So these, great companies are taking stock of their trade secrets, protecting them, guarding them, and then of course also maintaining a strong patent portfolio. And so it's really about having a strategy. And as I say to companies all the time, you're iterating every time you're inventing, you're sort of iterating through this question: are we going to maintain this as a trade secret? Are we going to patent? Or are we going to publicly disclose? And those are just continuous discussions. And so that's why it's important. I talk about establishing an IP review process and committee to evaluate the specific needs. How easy is it going to be protected? How important it is to maybe keep this confidential. We want to have a first mover advantage in the market as opposed to putting a patent application on file, which will be publicly disclosed. So these are the kinds of business questions that need to be asked in order to make a decision around whether to maintain as a trade secret or patent. Next slide. And so just quickly, because I know we're coming up on time, only a few minutes here, but just looking at things to consider. So the explainability, if it's more explainable, you generally want a patent. The employee retention risk, which I spoke about, that militates in favor of patents. The relevant patent landscape, if there are a lot of patents in that area, you probably want to be thinking about patenting yourself. The cost can be an issue, of course, and the risk if competitors access the invention, and the ease of maintaining secrecy. So those are just kind of at a high level the issues to look at when you're asking yourself these questions. And I think that's going to the final slide. Perfect.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Natalie, and thank you, Jay and Bernd, for your insights there. An incredibly interesting presentation. So we thank you very much for your time. We have a little bit of time for a few questions. We've had a number of questions in, so thank you very much to our audience for sending those questions in. This first question, I believe this may be for you, Natalie. Have your example patents been litigated? It appears that for the US, 101 issues may invalidate them as abstract. For instance, the spending model could be executed by a person as a mental function.
Right. So I think Jay did address some of this about the examples being litigated, but then the other question was just about the method. These methodologies look abstract. And the point I just want to make about that is the test in the US isn't just, is it abstract? If it is abstract, we look to see if there's sort of something more. I mean, these are a bit of amorphous concepts, but and what can qualify as that is if you're improving the computer in some way, or there's a practical application. I mean, there are a number of examples provided, for example, and Jay can speak to this, in the USPTO guidelines about what can qualify if you do have an abstract methodology. How do you have something more here that qualifies as patentable subject matter? And there was a recent decision, the Contour versus GoPro decision, that just came out in September, that folks may want to look at as well. I don't know if you have comments, Jay.
Yeah, no, I think that you addressed it. Essentially, these do look as they do look as though they can be mental processes done by a person, but you have to craft it in such a way that it is a technological improvement, and it's all in the way. If we have a good fundamental invention, it's all in the way that we write it up and address the recent case law to make sure that it isn't looked at as abstract. It's more looked at as a technical solution to a real world problem.
Well, it's so interesting because in Canada, in case anyone's curious, we really left off at the Bilski decision, if any of you are familiar with that. So it's really the machine or transformation. So in Canada, we look to physicality. So if you can show that there's an interaction with the user, you're gaining user inputs, then you meet that patentable subject matter test. So arguably, I mean, in some ways, Canada has a very simplified test for this, and in comparison to the US now, which is, I think, a little bit converging with the US or with Europe in terms of the technological advancement and technical effect. You guys are becoming friends.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. What is the current state of the law in the US and Europe on the patentability of inventions created by autonomous AI systems?
Well, I can answer from the US side. Currently, if an invention is solely invented by an autonomous system, it is not patentable because you have to have a human inventor. Of course, you can use an autonomous system as a tool and part of it, and then of course the less inventive the people are and the more inventive the AI is, it becomes a gray area. But just to answer that question specifically, if it's solely invented by the AI, it is not patentable in the US.
Yeah, so I take a similar result, I would say, or similar outcome in Europe. I mean, that question was also answered by the boards of appeal of the European Patent Office. So there were two decisions, I think, in late 2021, published in 2022, that confirmed that under European patent practice, an inventor, I mean, always the question, who is designated as the inventor in an application? And in these applications, an AI was invented, and that's why these cases were then also rejected, because the boards of appeal ruled that the inventor designated to a patent application must be a human being. So I can basically confirm what Jay just said. It's similar here in Europe.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And unfortunately, looking at the time, we will have to wrap up the Q&A section there, which is a shame because we have had a lot of questions in. Thank you very much for those. We will be sending those on to the panel, but please do get in touch if you have any further questions. Before I hand over to Natalie, Jay, and Bernd, takeaways and say their goodbyes, there are a couple of housekeeping bits. So please do, if you haven't already, download the course materials. You can find the PDF of today's presentation in handout pane. You'll also see an evaluation form. So please do download that and return the evaluation form for CLE credit. There'll also be a survey which appears when you leave the session. Please do fill that out. So for the last minute or so, I will hand over. Perhaps, Natalie, we can start with any key takeaways that you want our audience to leave today with. Thank you.
Well, just a key takeaway that I think, companies need to look at this as a long-term investment, and that, you do need to invest there. You do need to take a bit of a nuanced approach to protection in terms of global protection. It's not what you do in the US isn't necessarily what you can do in Europe and any other parts of the country. And it's a continuous exercise of trying to look at your innovation, your inventions, and figure out how best to protect those. And you're going to be continuously going through that decision-making process.
Thank you very much. Jay, I don't know if you want to say a few words before we finish. Thank you.
Sure. Just briefly, as we've all kind of indicated, each jurisdiction is different and each invention is a little different. And the questions are great as to, what's patentable, what's not patentable. And really it's, we all have experience in this area. And if you go to your patent attorney with your invention, it's going to be a strategy developed with you and your patent attorney to make sure that you're going, we have to, like Natalie mentioned, the recent GoPro case in the US, we always have to make sure we're on top of the law, and things are changing all the time. But the one takeaway from my standpoint is software is patentable. AI inventions are definitely patentable. They just need to be handled carefully to ensure success before each individual patent office.
Thank you very much, Jay. Bernd, if you have anything to say or any goodbyes. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just to add on what Jay just said, I mean, the key takeaway also is, I think, further than that, we take away that software and AI is generally patentable, even though we have more limitations in Europe than in probably the US. Still, quite a lot of, as we've seen the numbers, a lot of inventions are grantable. The decisive thing about software inventions is, and this is a key takeaway also, I mean, if you would ever consider filing such an invention as a patent application, it must be drafted the right way. And typically, what needs to be done more than comparable to other types of inventions in more technical areas is we as patent attorneys need to collaborate with the inventors and also the as I said, the programmers that implement. Typically, I mean, I personally have oftentimes discussions with them to just try to elicit, to dig a bit deeper, and try to go down to the technical implementation details, because there typically the patentable subject matter lies, and sometimes we as attorneys need to elicit that, and I think that's also something to bear in mind. Software is patentable, but we need to probably think a bit more as patent attorneys to get it granted.
Excellent. I think it's a fantastic place to end today's webinar. Thank you again to our wonderful panel. The knowledge that you have is incredible, and thank you very much for spending the hour with us and sharing that knowledge with us. Thank you also to our audience for being with us. We hope we can see you again soon. But have a lovely rest of your day. Goodbye.